Okay, filming this outside, music in the background, hopefully it doesn't get blocked on YouTube. The light's going, so I wanted to get this filmed because I just finished doing this. I read on Clove, somebody suggested using plumber's solder to fill small holes in control panels, or even big holes. So I went online and I looked up some auto body videos of repairing bullet holes in fenders, and it looked like it was very easy to do. So I bought a $33 kit at the hardware store that came with some lead-free solder, solid, some flux, brush to put the flux on, and a wire brush to help scrape away rust on whatever you're working on. I didn't actually use this. So what I've got is this panel. If you'll remember, there's 4 extra holes along the bottom, 4 extra on the top, and then a couple joystick holes. Now, the problem with backfilling, which is what I normally do, JB weld something to the back, a little piece of metal, and then Bondo over the top, is these side pieces fit on a block of wood, so it should be flush. There shouldn't be anything glued to the bottom because it'll raise it up above where it should be. So I wanted to lay it flat. So I decided to try soldering. So I got this kit. I had this, which is a butane torch. I don't have a propane torch or any welding gear or anything, but I had this. And I had an old rusty piece of metal, which somewhere I read that if you do this over a piece of rusted metal, the solder won't stick to that. So what I did was I put the control panel on top of the piece of rusted metal after cleaning the top and bottom really good and going around the whole inside of this with a file to get the rust out of the middle. One thing that would have made it a bit better is if I took a slightly bigger drill bit and chamfered the holes, because that gives more surface area evidently for the solder to adhere to. But being impatient, I decided to just go ahead and not do that, but just make sure the holes were clean. The back side, in the previous part of this video, I did with a Dremel scrape a little bit away to make sure it was recessed and not sticking out with the scrap bits of metal there, because the drill went this way through the metal. So I still need to put this on a piece of flat wood and rubber mallet it because it's dished. So again, I shouldn't have really done any of this soldering stuff until I had done that. And also I've got the one corner right there that's bent that I'm gonna try and hammer back a little, and that one is fine. So here's the thing: if you weld, supposedly you can warp the metal because of, I guess, the heat is so hot to weld, but with this soldering it doesn't get near hot enough. So the first thing I did was I practiced on this, which is from some arcade game, but I don't even know what. I think I got it from another collector when I picked up some stuff. And it seemed to be working. The solder was sticking after I sanded the area clean. I put the flux, the paste flux on, and if you can see, the solder stuck really well, but it didn't cover the hole very well. It just kept dripping through onto my patio. So that's when I came up with the idea of the wood block, remembering that somebody suggested it won't stick to metal. So that's why I laid the holes over that, which I still need to clean up. It's got some flux residue, but that seemed to work perfect. So the right hand side, I put like this on the metal panel, the metal scrap, and I soldered the inside. Obvious, because it's got bumps of solder there. On the left side, I put it like this on the rusted piece of metal and soldered on the top. Now right away, that looks pretty good. That right there is probably even good to go and wouldn't cause a problem. But it is raised up a tad. I don't know if I can get it to focus enough to show how much it's raised, but it's like, I don't know, like fingernail height. It's not that much. So that's not going to take much to sand clean, which is good, because this one is going to be a mess to sand clean, especially because I've got this to deal with and this to deal with. So sanding that is going to be a pain in the neck. So as far as the sanding goes, it looks like going from the top and letting that come through seems to be the better idea. Although this is going to be a multi-part video filmed over several days, I haven't sanded these down. What I did do is sand the top down, and I am really impressed. I sanded this by hand with 100 grit sandpaper, and I mean once that's painted, I'm betting it will be totally invisible. It is so smooth. I also went over these lines. Somebody cut in the overlay and with a really sharp knife that went through the metal, so the edges are a little bit raised. So this has got probably a little bit more sanding to do, but the rest of it went down here too. The rest of it is fairly flush. I think it'll be fine once painted, but I'll probably go over it again. But anyway, here's again, this is the side where I soldered on the top. So it took quite a bit of sanding. But again, it's beautiful. It's awesome. This one too, I can't even feel that at all. This one maybe needs a little bit more sanding. There was this one here, not enough solder. It didn't quite get in that last final area. So this one I'm going to be really curious about once I sand the back, if that plug is going to fall out. Because if not, then I'll probably just do this one again and add some more solder and try and get that better. But I'm thinking even with that like that, I might be able to just put a little Bondo in there and it'll be absolutely fine. It depends on the back, because I can't tell, does that hole go, all the way through? So once I sand the extra material off the back, you can see all the way through. Because if you don't, then I can just put a little tiny bit of Bondo in there, and that'll be perfect. So yeah, really happy with how that turned out today. Okay, before I do the rest of the holes, here's a video showing these finally sanded. Front and back. Now these two were the ones that I put the solder on the back of the panel, and it was a pain in the neck to sand the extra solder off because of the overhangs, the bends in the panel. After sanding the top, I realized that I have files. So yes, a file makes much quicker use to get it down near the panel than sanding the entire thing with sandpaper. This one here had a lot of extra material on it, or actually I think it was this one. So I used a Dremel with a sanding wheel to get it down close and then sanded it. This side over here were the ones where I soldered the top of the panel and it came through the back. I've decided that these I'm going to do from the top of the panel the same way I did these, and I'm probably not even going to sand them. In fact, I'm almost positive I'm not going to bother sanding the holes on the inside, because there's really no reason to. If I was trying to be 100% purist and get this to looking factory new, I guess I could do that before I painted it. But seriously, I just want the overlay to stick on the top. If you flip it over and you see a couple bumps, small bumps on the back, that's no big deal. I have thought about trying to fill this extra hole with some solder. I might get some sandpaper and see if I could glob some stuff in there and then sand the circle back so it's not got quite that gap. The overlay is going to be spanning over compared to the smaller gap for the notches cut out in the factory for the buttons. The problem is I really want to get it clean, and getting that rust free and clean for the solder to stick going to be a bit of a challenge without making it bigger. So, alright, filming this outside, giving this a shot. Gonna do at least one of these 6 holes on camera out here. The last one I did, I used this large metal block behind the panel to stop the solder from dripping through the hole. Not everybody has a large chunk of lightly surfaced rusted steel, so this time I figured I'd try something that more people would have, which is an old, I'm guessing this is a marquee bracket, just with some of the various arcade metal pieces I have that I actually don't know what cabinet it's from, but it is painted black with some rust spots coming through, and so I'm thinking the solder won't stick to that, so I will clamp that with some just cheap clamps onto the back of the panel behind the holes I'm filling, as an example of something metal you can use, something non-flammable that the solder won't stick to. And for prep work, I did take a drill bit that's larger than the holes and just by hand chamfered the holes a little bit on the outside to give a little more surface area for the solder to stick to. I could have used a drill and done it, but this is really actually soft, easily bendable metal. So I just did it by hand. I just wanted a little bit of additional surface area there. So that's it. I will stop the camera. Actually, I used some isopropyl alcohol and went over the holes both sides just to get the metal as clean as possible. It's already been sanded with 220 grit sandpaper after the paint, the adhesive, and obviously the overlay is taken off. And then I'm going to be using the same solder. Alright, excuse the rock on the panel, and I am using my big steel block underneath here, but that's just because these 2 holes, I can't put that marquee bracket all the way across the panel lengthwise and clamp it on both ends, because the latches that hold the control panel to the cabinet are kind of in line with these 2 holes. The other one should be fine, I think, but these 2, I have the marquee bracket angled like that, clamped on one end and not on the other, so I just put the metal block and a rock on it to hold the panel down as close to the marquee bracket as possible. So it's clamped on one end, and the weight of this is holding it down, so it's firmly in contact with that marquee bracket underneath. So now, I'm not sure how much flux is enough, but from what I've seen online, and again, I don't know if I emphasized it before, I learned this by watching videos. Do this at your own risk. I'm not responsible if you catch yourself, your panel, your house on fire. Be careful. Wear safety gear, take precautions. Benzene torch that you can get at a hardware store, the solder and flux that you can get at a hardware store. And what I'm going to do is use the torch to heat the area up And then again, just learning this from videos. Just keep going like this in the hot area with the solder. Once the metal is hot enough, the solder will start to stick to the panel. And that's when you can blob it on there to fill in your hole. And this, again, this hole is bigger than the other ones that I did, so I'm assuming it's going to work. But we'll see if that's too big of a hole or if it's okay. There it goes, the solder's starting to stick to the metal. I want to try and get it make sure it's covering the whole area. Now, being a amateur, I'm sure that is a ton more solder than I need. I also think it's going to be fine, so I'm going to do this one as well. Hopefully I don't run out of butane. I do have some more. You see the flux starts to melt, and it seems to be about the time that it starts turning brown is when the solder sticks. And what's turning brown, I think, is the panel, or the flux and not the panel. And I think I'm running out of I think my torch is running out. Indy, my torch is running out. Okay, yep, that's what I was afraid of. All right, torch ran out, so that stuff happens. We'll stop and start again, and maybe edit this out. Okay, ran out of fuel, filled it back up, put the rest of the fuel far away from the project here. It's cooled down, so I'll put some more flux on there. Again, this is amateur hour. But I'd heard it mentioned on the forums. Supposedly you can even powder coat after you do this because it's metal and not body filler. Not that I would powder coat a panel that's just going to get an overlay on it, but some panels that you can see the metal and just have an overlay that goes over part of it, you would probably powder coat, and this would be a way to do this and be able to powder coat it. Okay, back in business. So once again, you want to get it hot enough that the solder starts melting to the panel, which seems to me in the 5 holes I've done now about when the flux starts to turn brownish, which it's doing. Okay, it's starting to stick. Okay. And it's sizzling, which I think might be the flux sizzling off, I'm not sure. Okay, so that's 2 done. I'm zoomed in incredibly here, so hopefully this will stay in picture. Take off my clamp. Let's see. Marquee bracket. You can see flux, but it didn't stick. So that worked good. And now let's look at the back side. Wow, that's a lot of solder that came through compared to that big steel block I was using. And I'm wondering if it's because the marquee bracket wasn't quite held flush. I am going to sand that down because that's... where's the other one? There we go. That's, yeah. I don't need, well, I mean, I don't need to sand it down. It's not going to be in the way of the joystick, or the buttons, sorry. Those are joystick holes I'm filling. It's not going to be in the way of the button holders or leaf switch button holders, but yeah, I probably will sand that down because that's, hopefully that's going to focus on the profile there. That's almost looks like a rivet. Almost looks like a rivet coming through. So, okay, interesting. Not sure why, unless the heat made the, double check the panel. The panel doesn't appear to be warped. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm guessing that maybe the marquee bracket, even though it was clamped, didn't have enough pressure on it to hold it up enough to make the amount of solder that came through as small as the smaller holes. Or maybe it's because these holes are bigger. I don't know, but that's interesting. Just means more finish work, but the main part is filling the holes. And so as far as that goes, yeah, you can see they look like they're going to be completely filled. They're completely covered on the top, and they're definitely covered on the bottom. It's come all the way through. So I don't think I will film the other 4 that I have to do. So one over there, one over there. And will I get that in the camera without hitting the camera stand? One there, that one's a bit close to that hole. And that one there. Those 2, in fact, I might use the steel block for all 4 that are left, just because I have the steel block. So, and just see if it turns out any different. But you can see that all you need is some kind of metal that you can clamp up against the panel. The tighter the better, because you'll have less solder that comes through. So less cleanup and less use of the solder. But yeah, there you go. That's metal filling small holes in an arcade control panel. Okay. There are 6 holes filled, and the brown, again, that's mostly flux. That's not the metal. And if we look at the back, if you can see the profile of the 2 holes on the top and the 2 holes on the bottom of the control panel, not nearly as much solder came through as those 2 in the middle. I'm thinking it's a combination of the panel still being a bit bowed in the middle, and so when I clamped that marquee bracket across, it wasn't making really strong contact with the bottom of the panel, but you could see it still did work. So yes, I used the steel block and two big rocks to hold everything in place up against the steel block, and those bottom or other 4 holes, the ones that the plexiglass was riveted to this control panel with, came out with much less cleanup work needed, which is good because they're near the rolled edges, and that's kind of a pain to get to, and it's in the middle of the control panel as opposed to these that are on the edge, so it's easy to get in there with a file or something. Whereas those, I'm pretty much going to have to use a sanding block. But yeah, there you go. Rank Amateur Productions here. Yesterday did my first test piece on another piece of old arcade metal. Not the marquee panel that... Okay, here it is, sanded. This is the top. It's 10 holes, soldered and sanded. To do the back, even though I didn't need to do these. You'll see some pitting. There's a perfect example. That's me getting impatient. I was using a Dremel with a sanding drum to get the majority of the solder blobs off, and ended up nicking the panel a little bit. That is entirely my fault. Also did it a bit on the front. You can see there, around the hole there a little bit. So that's just me, and once that's painted and an overlay, you will not see that at all. So the only thing I didn't do was that repair right there, because there was a 4-way joystick. You can see the 2 holes below. They cut a notch there and over there. Excuse the plane. So yeah, I was a little bit worried about being able to clean that enough to get the solder to stick, and then I was impatient to get to sanding it after soldering it, and I forgot to even try this. So need to take a break, get something to eat, and I'll think about whether I'm going to come back and try and patch that. This one here doesn't really need it. It's barely any bigger than the notch by the factory. I know that the button will cover that, and also this one looks worse on the back because it was drilled at an angle. And I put a button in there, and the button does not leave any of this exposed. It covers that area, so the overlay should not lift up if I don't fix it. So I'll have to decide whether I want to do that or not. So apart from that one fix, there's just some light surface rust because I've got all the paint off. So I'll go over it with 220 grit sandpaper and shoot it with some satin black Rust-Oleum, taping off those 2 areas, right and left. That's one side is where the ground wire goes to ground the control panel, and it will be ready to cure for a while and get overlay on it. But yeah, big success doing the soldering to fill the holes. No unsightly metal and epoxy on the back, especially in an area like that where it might have interfered with the leaf button switch holder because it's close to the hole. Alright, decided to go ahead and fill that. So here's a shot before, obviously, before I try and clean it up. I actually soldered front, front and back. I went for the back first, but I saw that it didn't quite get coverage, so I went on both sides. So I've got extra grinding and sanding to do to get that flush. I did not do this one because I know that that one is okay, and this one was cut at an angle, so there was a lot of surface area, so I thought I'd have a better chance of it working, and it was closer to the edge of the button, but once a button is on that, it's going to be covered up, so I'm not going to fix that one. But yeah, there it is before grinding and sanding. Oops. Alright, that worked amazingly well. So if you remember, right here, this control panel had a 4-way joystick, so there's 2 holes, and then they enlarged these button holes to install the 4-way joystick bolts. And this one, not sticking out far enough that I'm going to bother filling it, because these factory notches, the push buttons have small ridges on them that help keep them from twisting and coming loose. And this one here, honestly, is about the same size as the factory notch. The artwork's going to fit over that, and the button will completely cover it. This one was close. The button, I'm pretty sure, would cover it, but it was close. But now you can see, soldered it, sanded it, contoured it, and it looks just amazing. And there's the back where you can get a better idea where the drill came in at an angle. It wasn't drilled straight like this one was drilled pretty straight on. This one was at an angle, so it was wider opening on the back side. So I did put the solder on the back and the front, and then I sanded it flat, and I used a Dremel to make the contour, and it's amazing. it looks really good. I am tempted to do this one now that I've seen this one, but seriously, I think that one's okay, and because it's close to that notch, I think the solder will probably go in, whereas this one was further away from the notch. So I think this would be more cleanup if I did that one, so I'm not going to do that one. But there we go. Some 220 grit, final sanding, and a couple coats of Rust-Oleum satin black, and then some time to cure. Then this will be ready for a new overlay.